Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Wadier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Wadier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We are going to dive into a topic that is at the underlining or the underbelly of a lot of the things that we do with helping folks adopt a fasting lifestyle, lose weight, and get healthy once and for all, getting off that dieting roller coaster or weight loss roller coaster, as we like to say. And we're going to talk about blood sugar and blood sugar spikes and why it ultimately matters and why we feel that fasting is such a powerful tool to once and for all get consistency, get the weight off, and get the results that you've been looking for. So if you're new to the podcast, we want to welcome you in. Thanks for giving us a shot. Thanks for listening. Thanks for adding us into your fasting lifestyle journey. We are on this journey with you. And if you want to know more about why we do what we do and how fasting has transformed our lives and the lives of so many others since the inception of the podcast and coaching and challenges years ago, head back to episode 0, episode 1. Give it a listen. To give you insights into why we do what we do and how powerful fasting can be. So I want to give a shout out, Tommy, before we dive in today. One of our favorite kind of reviews, if you feel so inclined to leave us a review, we greatly appreciate it. That tells the podcast world that we're bringing value week in and week out. We've been blessed with thousands of reviews, most of our favorite kind, which are the 5-star kind, which we're going to give you a shout out here now. To CK1973. Oh, well, duh, in real time. CK1973. So peek behind the curtain into my brain and how it works. I was reading it off like a confirmation code.
Right.
Says, love the pod. One of you mentioned that you stopped drinking alcohol. Can you explain to us the steps you took to come to get your mind right to do that?
Wow.
Sure. I'd be happy to weave that into today's conversation about what is a blood sugar spike and why does it matter? Because it actually, one of the motivating factors for me directly relates to why does it matter and why do we talk about this stuff? So keep listening. CK1973, thank you so much for your kind remarks and your 5-star review. So Tommy, this conversation about blood sugar spikes, I see this in the cortisol adrenal world as well, being in functional medicine, where cortisol is demonized and everybody has high cortisol. Well, not necessarily. Without testing, you don't really know. But we also get this, it's out there, where are blood sugar spikes bad? And the answer to that question is inherently no. But long-term blood sugar volatility can be detrimental to long-term results, long-term health, and disease development. So if we didn't, your body is designed to process the energy in an efficient way when you eat. However, we'll talk about area under the curve and what that means when we get into today's conversation. But the big picture, just like cortisol, you need it. It wakes you up in the morning. It's your fight or flight response. But if you have too much of it or too little of it, then you've got a problem. And we say this in our challenges, you can't consistently get long-term weight loss and health results if you don't balance your blood sugar, your insulin, and that cortisol response.
Yeah.
That is my story. That is our story. That's the story of so many others in shifting the focus away from that dang little number on the scale, from that piece of plastic, glass, and metal that has batteries in it that identifies your self-worth on a day-to-day basis,
Right.
and moving away from that weight loss on-off mentality, dieting mentality, into the bigger picture of why we started to do this, which is for health reasons, right? So the big picture here is avoiding sharp rises in blood sugar can help you feel better now and avoid disease later. So how do we recognize and prevent that volatility, or what we call that area under the curve, when it comes to blood sugar? Because if you feel better now, you're going to be much more likely to make the habit and lifestyle changes, especially when it comes to fasting and you're telling yourself not to eat in a very obesogenic food environment, food noise filled world. If you feel better now, you're going to be more likely to stay consistent, because we know that willpower, poof, in a moment can be gone.
Yeah. So what if you can understand intuitively that regardless of your food choices, if they stay the exact same as where they are now without making any changes to them, if you compartmentalize your meal times, you're doing time restricted feeding versus just kind of not worrying about it, not fasting, if you will, then you'll tend to have better blood sugar management, okay, on average. So without any food choice differences. But then also you can take it a step further, and once you compartmentalize your meal timing, you're using fasting to some degree, then it can make it easier to make the next best food choice, because you may get a little bit of traction on some of your cravings. You may have better satiety, better hunger control, better appetite regulation, and appetite signaling from your body, where you can actually interpret those signals. Because pre-fasting, I couldn't have told you what a hunger or a satiation cue actually felt like, I don't think.
It was a math equation, right?
Yeah, some sort of caloric math equation, or some sort of a calorie is a calorie. So I may as well just have my calories at night when I'm going to enjoy them more, when things are kind of slower and quieter. And
I'll get up early and just burn them off on the elliptical.
Sure. Or maybe I'll even have like a late night elliptical session, maybe before enjoying my dinner.
Right.
And then I don't have CGM data from back then, but I could tell you how I felt and how terrible I felt, especially compared to now. So when we think about integrating fasting and how it makes the process easier, a lot of that is because of blood sugar volatility control. It's actually like attenuating some of that volatility, and remembering that blood sugar is a big part of the equation. It's not the whole equation with the scale and what you mentioned before, looking at that number, but food choices and fasting times determine what's going on blood sugar wise. Our food choices and fasting times also impact what happens insulin response wise as a direct response to those blood sugar changes. And then that affects directly what's going on the scale as well.
So why do we care about blood sugar spikes or glycemic volatility, right? So let's set the stage here. Your blood glucose levels rise typically, they rise and fall throughout the day. You wake up in the morning, norepinephrine, cortisol rise, they wake you up. You have a glycogen dump, gives you energy to start your day. Now, how much it increases and falls is crucial to the long-term metabolic health. So we expect the small changes, but the large swings are the things that we want to most time avoid. And the reality is, when you eat, your body turns the carbohydrates into glucose, and that powers your cells. So that goes into your bloodstream, triggers insulin, which then either uses that energy, and we'll talk about this phenomenon in the post-meal lull or blood sugar crash, or so it uses it for fuel, or it stores it for later use. So yes, we're a fasting podcast. Yes, we have a fasting lifestyle. Yes, we coach on it. Yes, we do challenges. But we spend 80% of our time talking about our food, our relationship with food, and our food choices. Because we know that food is the main driver. There are ancillary things like sleep, exercise, and stress. But what you eat is the most significant driver of that change. And this is what we call glycemic variability. So the goal for better metabolic health is to keep your variability looking more like, if you go back to math class back in the day and you had the sine wave and the cosine wave and the XY axis, rather than these big peaks and valleys, We want to see more rolling hills.
Okay, yeah, it's a good way to think about it.
Because if you have a big spike, if anyone's had the sugar crash, you feed your kids sugar and then they go crazy and then they crash and their mood changes.
Right, right.
Ultimately, the mood change results in a habit, either reactivation or formation, where you find yourself reliant on or having trouble with the snacking, the
Mhm.
cravings, the hunger, etc.
Or chasing that lack of energy post
Right,
crash with some more fuel because you feel
right.
like, oh man, what am I going to do? And for adults, a lot of times that's caffeinated fuel, which oftentimes comes with more sugar too to just continue to increase that volatility.
100%. So, why we care about blood sugar spikes? It's not about the number on the scale. Keeping it consistent, yes, will move the needle, allow you to stay consistent, lose the weight once and for all, get off the dieting weight loss roller coaster, adopt the fasting lifestyle. Fasting is a huge lever, and we'll talk about it a way we're going to frame it a little bit differently in terms of fasting times versus meal times or nutrition opportunities, we like to call them. But the
Hmm.
reality is that this variability is linked to illnesses like cancer, cardiovascular disease, dementia, increased mortality risk. So the high glycemic variability can also damage cells in your insulin's effectiveness, which can lead to metabolic syndrome and metabolic dysfunction. So all of these chronic lifestyle conditions that we have more medication than for more people on than ever before, right? 30 million Americans are diabetics, 80 million Americans are undiagnosed pre-diabetics. The link to insulin as the root cause, or the insulin's effectiveness or the insulin resistance as the root cause of 8 out of the top 10 reasons why or lead to all cause mortality increase. So
Hmm.
we want to look at insulin as that lag measure for what the blood sugar is doing. So if you have a big blood sugar spike, then insulin has to come in and decrease it, creates that volatility. So the reason why we want to look at and care about these blood sugar spikes, 30 to 40 points in variability is fine. But we want to look at insulin resistance. We want to look at vascular dysfunction, right? We want the health of your cardiovascular system. We want to look at oxidative stress and inflammation, because we know inflammation is the root cause of a lot of lifestyle, long-term chronic disease process. And then we also absolutely want to talk about the glucose ketone conversation around cognitive dysfunction or brain health, because we now know that we have an epidemic with the baby boomer generation of type 3 diabetes, aka dementia and Alzheimer's.
Mm.
That the plaque model in itself is being broken down by the blood sugar component that starts in the much earlier decades before it shows up later in life,
Yeah.
right? So
Which makes sense because the brain tissue is so metabolically active.
100%. Your brain uses an immense amount of your body's energy on a
Hmm.
daily basis. I want to say it's like 20 to 25%. That's
Yeah,
off the
I
top of
think
my
it's
head.
I think it's around 4 to 5 times its proportional mass versus the rest of the tissues in your body, something like that.
So when we look at insulin resistance, high blood sugar, um, your body develops what we call insulin resistance with leptin. It blocks the signals. So your body then needs to produce more insulin, right? Which then increases more insulin resistance. Think about a diabetic that's managing, air quotes, their diabetes, following the American Diabetes Association food pyramid, getting all their carbohydrates in. Their A1C goes up. They eventually get on insulin. Well, once you get on insulin, typically as time goes by, you need more insulin. That's what Dr. Fung realized as a late stage nephrologist. He was like, wait a
Hmm.
minute, what am I doing? I'm ultimately advancing this disease process. And it's a vicious cycle, which
Yep.
leads to type 2 diabetes, heart disease, infertility, Alzheimer's, et cetera, some of the things we mentioned. So at the core, fasting allows your insulin and your glucose to come down and increases your insulin sensitivity when you break your fast intentionally, right?
Yeah, it does. And just a correction for what I just said, it's actually more dramatic. It's 10 times. Your brain uses 10 times its proportional weight for the amount of energy that you would assume based on the rest of the average of your body tissue. So it's crazy metabolically active, which means that metabolic inefficiencies, metabolic problems are very likely to maybe not show up in a way that necessarily is symptomatic earlier, but having insight into what's going on into your brain and understanding that your brain will be feeling the effects of metabolic dysfunction before the rest of your body means a lot of these things and the levers that we're going to pull and that we're talking about here, we're pulling these for increased brain longevity, protecting the health of one of the most important tissues in our body. So when we're looking at blood sugar management, Scott, before we were talking on this episode, you mentioned to me the term glucose management zone, as far as when we're making a food decision, when we're actually in an eating nutrition opportunity, right? Glucose management zone. I really like that. And what that means to me is that when you're going into a nutrition opportunity, thinking about it as a time to know that you're going to make a change to your blood sugar, there's going to be a response, and then there's going to be an insulin response to that blood sugar spike. So let's control what that's going to do, because we know that it's going to affect how much insulin gets released, how we're going to feel after that meal and after that blood sugar response. And then ultimately tomorrow, likely what the scale says too, and maybe what it says the day after that as well. And that's to say nothing of how easy is it going to be to actually complete that next fast or want to set the next fasting timer afterwards, right? How likely is it that I'm going to keep my window closed tonight going into this evening? That's going to have a lot to do with what this blood sugar spike look like.
Yep, 100%. So before we give you what levers or optimizers, as we like to say, we don't like the word hacks. Just comes with a negative connotation. Biohacking. It's like, all right, well, why don't we tap into the body's normal physiology if we can? So we'll give you some optimizers. But I want to touch on the effects that you might feel. How does this show up in your day-to-day if you have volatility in your blood sugar? Because if you don't have a CGM or a Keto Mojo and you're not doing like a post-meal check within 30 to 60 minutes, that's typically the accepted range of when we should see a blood sugar response return to normal, right? Return to the baseline of where it started before you ate. You're going to see hunger and cravings. So a blood sugar spike can come with a crash, right? So you're going to see hunger and cravings for more sweet, savory type things. If you've got blood sugar volatility, you're going to feel negative emotions. Blood sugar spikes, feelings of sadness, low energy, increased agitation, anxiety. There was a study in type 2 diabetes in women. The more glycemic variability also seemed to have more negative moods, depression, anxiety, and anger. This is where we talk a lot about this. We want to reframe this with this new concept of glucose management zones, because in the fasting state, you're in a glucose insulin reduction zone. Like, let's get that sucker down. Let's tap into long-term fat stores. Let's get the energy into the cell to be used, so we don't have this excess floating around. But when in our food window, even if you are consistently fasting, yet you are dealing with halt the BS, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed, you have more serotonin and dopamine receptors in your gut than you do anywhere else in the body. So going to those foods, if you have blood sugar volatility, you could see that in your emotional changes pre and post meal, how you feel about food. And then the last piece is what we've talked about a lot lately, is the disruption of your circadian biology, which is eating later, higher carb food temperature, higher carb meals later in the evening. I know on my Whoop, I'm going to see a higher heart rate, a resting heart rate. I'm going to see a higher body temperature.
Yeah, right.
And it's known that type 2 diabetics typically struggle, and frontline workers have higher incidence of cardiovascular disease, struggle with sleep. So
absolutely.
How do you recognize it? Well, those are some of the key indicators that you might be experiencing blood sugar volatility. And what we really want to shoot for is a change in about 30 to 40 milligrams per deciliter. So if your starting blood sugar before a meal is 100, within 30, it should go up 30 to 40 points, right? If your glucose management zone, the foods you chose during that window, were intentional, as we like to say, a nutrition opportunity, then we want to see within 30 to 60 minutes, that spike come back down to a normal range. So instead of a mountain and a valley, it becomes a hill,
Okay. I like it.
right?
So yeah. Well, when you're going to make those food choices, sometimes your blood sugar volatility from the meal before or from the end of that previous fast, those are going to matter. They can definitely affect your food decisions in that moment. And so in that regard, you want to think about these things as links in a chain rather than just discrete opportunities or discrete decisions. They're all connected because the likelihood of my success in my next fast is related to these food choices, et cetera, et cetera. The pattern continues to go. But speaking of also late night eating, going back to insulin resistance and vascular dysfunction, if you are eating late, like I did so many times, and still may do on occasion, but I know how I'm going to feel. I know, like you said, I'm going to be sleeping different. I'm not going to get the same quality sleep or the same recovery percentage the next day. But if you think about it before making like a lifestyle adjustment where that's just not really as appealing as it used to be, if you're fueling up going into the evening time, trying to get into a rest and repair sleep state, you're if you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor or you're looking at your blood sugar or your ketones, what you'll notice is that your body does not get rid of that blood sugar very efficiently. You can wake up at a similar level to where you went to bed if you made poor food choices at towards the later part of the evening because your body just doesn't have anything to do with it. And which is it can be a bit surprising, but you could take that a step further and go, okay, well, I'm still storing glycogen. I'm taking a lot of those calories and I'm storing them. Well, what am I doing at that point? I'm I'm raising blood pressure in order to do that. I'm having an effect on the kidneys and on overall blood volume and fluid retention. So then overnight, during a third of my day, I'm having this increased vascular pressure. And so that adds up and it adds up and it has a residual effect on blood pressure the next day too. So now I'm waking up the next morning with a blood sugar problem and a blood pressure problem too.
And the less likelihood of glucose variability that following day.
Mm,
So you're going to have more. That's why we say doing dinner OMAD is great, but making sure you're making intentional choices, prioritizing protein. We'll talk about some of the optimizers here in just a minute, how to get those blood sugar spikes to come down without having that long elevated, what we call area under the curve. If you just colored in with a marker under one of the peaks or valleys or one of the rolling hills, that's the area under the curve, which indicates that glycemic blood sugar variability that we want to keep in check.
mhm.
I think this is a perfect time to talk about. Well, I'm glad you mentioned blood pressure too, because we know that salt gets blamed for what insulin causes,
Yeah.
right? So, especially with carbohydrates, spikes insulin the most, and then every gram of carbohydrate that's stored as glycogen, 3 grams of water comes along with it.
Hmm.
So your body, your aldosterone tells the kidneys when insulin's high, hey, we need this water. This is the whoosh effect when you go low carb or you start fasting. Because once insulin comes down, aldosterone tells the kidneys, hey, flush it out. We don't need this water anymore. So
Right.
this on-off blood sugar volatility, non-clean fasting windows, high carb, high ultra refined processed, easy, convenient foods is going to cause that to be even more volatile. And that's going to put additional stress on the vascular system, which is ultimately where we started this conversation is why do we care about why do we care about blood sugars or
That's a
glucose spikes, so to speak?
that's a great example because and think about where you're likely coming into fasting, and then the easiest way to start fasting would be just compartmentalize your eating time, but not make any changes to your food composition or your food decisions at that point. But depending on what you're used to eating or how many times, how often are you eating ultra processed foods or things that they're really not helping you physiologically, they're not very intentional. Um, those are mattering, even if the scale is moving in the right direction. Like you could see some progress, but at the same time, you're definitely not having an optimal physiological response. Is also the point there.
And this is the opposite of the dieting mentality where it's like stoke your metabolism, eat 3 meals plus snacks. You're going to be in a low calorie deficit, but a high insulin state,
Yeah.
right? So you're going to be having this constant up and down volatility of the blood sugar, which is going to put a higher load on the pancreas to increase insulin, which then can lead to insulin resistance over time.
Mhm.
So a couple of physiological things of why we care about managing this aka blood sugar management. And optimally, if you look at the ranges that are out there, A1C less than 5.7 is normal, pre-diabetes 5.7 to 6.5, diabetes greater than 6.5 in terms of A1C. But then fasting plasma glucose or fasting blood glucose, they recommend less than 100. Well, when my fasting insulin number was 22, unbeknownst to me, being an undiagnosed pre-diabetic back in the day when I was spending all this money on things trying to figure out why my liver enzymes were up and my sleep sucked. And no matter what I did, I always carried the extra visceral fat around my midsection. And I was working out 5 days a week and I was in a deficit, hired a functional nutritionist. My numbers were all, from a blood sugar perspective, they were great. No one ever ran a fasting insulin test, right?
Mhm.
But ideally, what we want to see is not normal less than 100, because 100 to 125 is pre-diabetic. I'd argue that 90 or plus is potentially pre-diabetic, depending on your metabolic state. We want to see really optimizing 90 and below is where you want your baseline blood sugar to be throughout the day. Because then if you have a spike or you have ice cream with the kids or have some drinks on a date night, then your body has the ability to manage that better. And it's not as volatile because you're in a less insulinogenic state. So a couple of things I want to mention of blood sugar spikes in terms of glycation. This is something that will drive cellular aging. So we want to, and fasting reduces that glucose exposure, which reduces that glycation damage over time. Oxidative stress. So when blood sugar spikes generate these reactive species in the body, which damage DNA, mitochondria, blood vessels, root cause of metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, etc. So when we fast, it lowers that oxidative stress and our body switches to ketone production, which is a cleaner energy source in our opinion, especially if you're struggling with weight loss resistance. And then the inflammatory connection. So high glucose activates inflammatory pathways that are linked directly to heart disease, neurodegeneration, brain, Alzheimer's, dementia, and cancers. So we know that fasting reduces those pro-inflammatory cytokines, specifically IL-6 and TNF-alpha. So looking at this big picture, like how do we apply this glucose, what do we call it, Tommy? It's brand new and I just forgot it in real time.
Glucose management zone.
Glucose management zone. So a different way to look at a nutrition opportunity. And I want to talk through some of the optimizers that we can use to help manage these blood sugar spikes. So if you're feeling that post-meal crash or that the changes in mood or the changes in energy,
you're not the same when you're hungry.
Yeah,
right?
you're hangry, right? You're not. Yeah, exactly. There's some things that you can do to optimize your glucose management zones, your nutrition windows when you eat. One is you can use apple cider vinegar on the front end. An ounce of apple cider vinegar and some water, that's going to help blunt the postprandial or post-meal blood sugar spike, right? Fasting in itself will help. So stay consistent because that is ultimately the biggest lever that we pull to get people results and what we've seen results with. 10 minutes of movement or 10 to 15 minute walk post-meal. This is such a simple one to do because it requires no equipment. It requires no gym membership. And we've done studies on this before on the podcast episode where air squats, wall sits, even breaking it up into short little 3-minute bursts throughout the day. But post-meal specifically, 30% reduction in blood sugar spike.
So great. What a great return on investment right there.
Right? So simple, right? And then this one, it can work for some, doesn't work for others, but I do like it. is how you eat your meal. So veggies, fiber, protein, fat, and then carbs
Yeah.
reduces those postprandial blood sugar spikes by up to 40%.
Oh yeah, and it could even be more than that if you compared it to just naked carbs. Like if you took a
Right.
dessert, like a dessert without any,
Like a
especially
dessert as a snack versus a dessert
yeah,
like at the end of a meal.
correct. Yeah. With nothing else to kind of set the stage for the blood sugar response, which then sets the stage for the insulin response, you just have these naked carbs that come in, and then your body's reaction to those carbohydrates or that food choice is basically over exaggerated for lack of a better term. It creates that large spike that you were talking about, which is the exact opposite of those rolling hills that we're looking for.
And fasting really acts as that metabolic reset. So it helps your body because insulin's the gatekeeper, right? From using
Mhm.
the energy that comes in to potentially storing it as fat. We need to tap into that fat burning metabolic switch. And that's where fasting really, the consistency with fasting over time really shows to be the breadwinner, to be a clear winner in terms of metabolic change, lab change, and ultimately what most people want, which is change on that pesky little thing on the floor called the scale, right?
Mm.
I want to talk briefly, Tommy, about the question about alcohol, because I think it fits in the conversation about blood sugar volatility, sleep, stress, why glucose spikes and glucose management matters. And this came in from CK 1973, right? How did I get my mindset right around this?
Yeah.
And it really came from a lot of the things that we just talked about in what I realized was happening after I drank. Right now,
Okay.
we're not going
Yeah.
back to the college days when, not going back to my restaurant days when I was running and managing and bartending in restaurants, where alcohol was part of the lifestyle. And I'm not demonizing alcohol. It is a toxic element to the body when it gets in your system. And your body then shuts down fat burning and has to process. It's almost like its own macronutrient category,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
If you've ever tracked alcohol, you can track it as a fat or a carbohydrate, right? 7 grams, 7 kilocalories of energy per gram or carbs. Uh,
Yes.
Protein, fat is 9, carbs and protein are 4. Well, alcohol is 7. Well, what happens is your body stops fat burning. So what I was finding was I wasn't getting consistent results with my fasting lifestyle. I wasn't really moving the needle. I was bouncing 3 to 5 pounds up, over months after I got a considerable amount of weight off, my labs restored, et cetera. What I realized was that when I would have, so we're not talking heavy consumption days, we're talking a couple of drinks at a date night, a couple of drinks at a celebration,
Okay.
a mimosa at a baby shower, like those types
Okay.
of things. But
Maybe two.
mostly,
Maybe two for a baby shower.
maybe two,
But
maybe two
nothing.
carafes.
No, nothing crazy though.
Yeah, no, but honestly, just like a craft IPA and maybe a skinny. I don't do skinny margaritas, but like tequila on the rocks, like simple stuff.
Okay.
Two drinks.
Okay.
It would take me 2 days to feel like myself again between the ears.
Mm.
And what I noticed was if we were doing that in the early evening, because we go out to date nights early with our kids, I would notice that I would not be the same husband and dad the following day. Like I would be much more reactive, much more
Mm.
volatile, less like the person that I wanted to show up as. So
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
me,
Yeah.
I was like, the first line in the sand for me was if I'm parenting the next day, alcohol's off the table.
Okay.
And what I found for me was that it was more about the sleep that it disturbed than about the alcohol itself.
Mm.
Because I knew that I was going to sleep like crap, wake up between, 2 and 3 a.m. and be awake for a while. I never had any hangovers, never hit a rock bottom with it. But I just realized that even if I was putting that strategically into my windows and my date nights, that following day, so if it was a Friday night, Saturday wasn't showing up great for the family.
Yeah.
Sunday started to feel a little bit better, but then even if I fast on Sunday, come Monday, usually by the end of Monday, I started to feel like myself again.
Wow.
And I just realized that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze in this season of life. So I'm not an anti-alcohol person, But just for me, I realized that I was seeing myself. It was hindering me getting to be the person that I wanted to be, less about what it physiologically was doing with the scale or the weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
And I just knew that it was time to cut it out. And so there wasn't
Wow.
any big aha moment, right? It was just, you know what, the juice isn't worth the squeeze right now. Now, not to say if my wife going away and I go away on a weekend and we don't have kids and grandma and grandpa are in town, that I may
Mm-hmm.
have a drink or two. I don't know. We've had some situations like that and I've chosen not to. But that line in the sand for me was how I show up, how I felt, and what was going on between the ears, most importantly.
Man, that's awesome. That's really cool to kind of hear how it unfolded, because the prioritization there, what I heard was that it wasn't some massive injection of willpower or something else like that you know that maybe was part of that question, right? In
Right.
that review might have been like how would you get that process started? Where did the kind of the willpower come from? But the self reflection though, and then the misalignment with your core values, which
Yep.
was being able to show up as the best version of you, as much as possible, and then just seeing that it was taking a toll on that,
Yeah.
and then going, that's not who I want to be, or that's not how I want to show up. I really like that, because I think that most of us could relate to that in some respect, without having to feel like I got to muster up this large amount of willpower, to kind of
Right.
get it started.
And the family and friends thing too in this is powerful too, because um, maybe we're getting invited to less stuff. I don't really know. I'm not a big
Mhm.
social butterfly.
Yeah.
But specifically with family, it's tough. Around the holidays, travel with family,
Where
drinks.
they're concerned about drinks and you're
Yeah,
not.
drinks are just part of what we do when we get together.
Hmm.
So now it's a no-brainer. But in the beginning, yeah, it was hard to be like, no, I'm good. No, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm good for now. Those kind of
Yeah.
conversations. And this
Just like fasting can
parallels,
be too.
was that?
Just like fasting can be
I was
too.
just going to say, this parallels the conversation with fasting. So I had so many reps at that. I
Yeah.
was like, yeah, it was just the right time for me. So I don't know if
Uh,
that's helpful, CK, but as we wrap up today's episode, I want to talk about 5 specific ways to help reduce those blood sugar spikes, Tommy. We
okay.
talked about some optimizers, but we want to really aim for whole, low GI foods, right? So we know that sweets and white bread and refined processed foods and all that stuff can quickly spike blood sugar. And we gave you how you can eat the meal in a way that can help reduce that, or walking post-meal, ACV pre-meal, etc.
Mm.
But watch the things like coffee creamers, condiments, salad dressings. Just watch those things to see, hey, maybe there's a swap you can use, right? There's some great brands out there now that give you the opportunity to really craft your glucose management zones, those meal times, those nutrition opportunities with a little bit more intention.
Yeah, I never knew how much I loved oil and vinegar as a dressing, or like oil and balsamic vinegar,
Right?
versus like back in the day, I would just always opt for a honey mustard or a ranch. But
Thousand,
essentially, it's
not Thousand Island. What's the Catalina?
Catalina. I
Catalina
don't.
wine mixer. The Catalina dressing, man, that was a staple in my house.
Was it those
Or
things?
the low sodium Italian dressing.
Okay.
What?
Why? Yeah. So, but if you think about those, I mean, just as liquid, especially the highly processed ones, you got seed oils and the high fructose corn syrup just loaded in there. I mean, they're almost like syringes. It's like an
Yeah,
insulin
right?
response syringe. So, trying out, something else there can be
Yep.
just really really big, or uh, make your own. It's
Yeah.
it's not that much work, and you get to control the ingredients. You can make it taste really really good, but not just have the same blood sugar and insulin response, which is great.
So prioritize protein, healthy fats, fiber, and ultimately, limit those carbohydrates, put them at the end of the meal, etc.
Yeah.
And that leads to another one is you want to pair those carbs with fat and protein,
Yep.
because we know that the carbohydrates will tend to lead to those quicker glucose spikes. We talked about moving after eating. Even a cool study in 2022, it was a meta-analysis, found that just 2 minutes of walking, just 2 minutes, never mind 10 to 15 minutes,
Yeah.
can have a significant effect on your glucose response. And then we already talked about this one a lot, but sleep.
Mm.
And this was a big thing for me. Sleep was always something I wore as a badge of honor. Stayed up late, cramming for exams, working in the restaurant business. My dad used to get up at 2:30 in the morning to go to work. He'd be home 2:30 in the afternoon every day. So I always saw that as a tough it up, buttercup kind of thing.
Sure.
Like, you sleep when you're dead, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I used to say that too, but there's nothing more disturbing to sleep than a late night drink though, too, to tie it back to that.
Yep.
That
The
whole
Cowboy
situation.
Coffee at Anthony's in Simonton, Texas. Oh my goodness. The Cowboy Coffee.
Yeah.
It's not worth it.
Right.
2021 study found that sleep quality is deeply tied to blood glucose control. We've talked about this at length over time. One night of poor sleep triggering high blood sugar the following day, which is going to create volatility in your decision making, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we really want to be aiming for that 7 hours of sleep. We have a sleep guide. You can head to the show notes. You can grab it. It's on the resource page on our website. In this household, we prioritize sleep with our kids. We say no to a lot of late night stuff. Yes, on vacations, it's different, which we take about one time a year.
Mm-hmm.
But consistent sleep hygiene is really key for managing blood sugar. And then we already mentioned, Tommy, a few times today, avoid eating late at night. We say in this house, kitchen closes at 7:30. Nothing good happens after 7:30 p.m. in the kitchen.
Right. Agreed.
That's it.
It's almost impossible to manage your glucose as it gets that late in the day. Your body's not trying to manage glucose. It's terrible at managing glucose at that point.
Up to 30% less insulin sensitivity at night.
It's too late. It's too late to manage glucose. It's just going to stay, and then you're going to wake up needing to then manage the dinner that you had. It's crazy. So make sure to manage your next glucose management zone. So
fewer meals, fewer spikes, intentionality in your glucose management zones, your nutrition windows, your opportunities when you get in quality nutrition. You're going to have, with fasting lifestyle, improved insulin sensitivity over time, which is going to decrease your risk of diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cancers, Alzheimer's, all of the stuff that we talked about earlier. And ultimately, what a lot of people come to fasting for, which is better weight loss and, or more importantly, management, Tommy. So love the conversation today. As we wrap up the conversation, if you're looking for more support, head to the show notes, the Blueprint to Fasting for Fat Loss. Join an upcoming challenge if you want an accelerated version of 7 days of fun and fasting. Join one of our 7-day Master Your Fasting challenges. We also have the fasting quiz, the sleep guide. So head to the show notes, click the link, reach out to us if you've got questions, Tommy. As always, man, I appreciate the conversation, and we'll talk soon.
Thank you. Bye.
So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.